Welcome to the Amazing... Hey, we're not doing any more of that. Hey friendles, I'm Kendall, and many of you who followed me on my art socials will know that I've moved recently, and my body still struggles to reconcile with the concept of stability despite the fact that I theoretically have everything in life going in a positive direction, but when your brain is used to scanning for danger, being in a good place definitely feels different. Anyways, that's neither here or there. You saw the thumbnail, so that means y'all are here to watch me make a Pomni doll. The Amazing Digital Circus is one of the best things I'd seen in a really long time. And indie animation doesn't usually appeal that much to me, mainly because the concepts are always too adult. But this right here, this absolutely hit all the right notes in concept, story, pacing, design, music, just everything is perfect. Whenever I go into any media, I always come out of it thinking there's at least one thing that I would do differently, but I cannot think of a single thing about the Amazing Digital Circus I would have done differently. It's just that good. Okay, before I keep going off about the show being the best thing since fire hydrants, I really ought to get into the doll making process. So this all actually started not long after I uploaded my Doll Luigi video series. I had thought that my next doll would be a Rosalina doll, so I doodled some Rosalina doll concepts, but then I had the passing thought that making a Pomni doll would probably draw more attention to my work, since the Amazing Digital Circus is relatively new and popular, so I might as well strike while the iron is hot. You know, 3 months later. I doodled some doll concepts of Pomni in a sketchbook, and I really liked the direction they were going in, so I moved on to drawing a digital blueprint. I opened up Photoshop and got to drawing, but you can probably see that I wasn't drawing all too confidently. So I'd been going through these really weird phases of on and off performance anxiety when it comes to drawing, and it's very obvious when I'm drawing digitally. I really didn't feel like this drawing was going very well, and I knew that if I kept forcing myself to try to make it good or to keep drawing, that I was eventually just going to frustrate myself. So I decided to take a step back from this orthographic image and just wait. Just wait. So the next day I jumped into making a new orthographic image while telling myself to just draw as if I was doodling. And that pretty much solved the problem. So yeah, my performance anxiety was still pretty bad at that time, but it's gotten a lot better since, especially when I just kind of told myself to treat it like I was doodling. I also drew some joints as a visual guide so that making them would be easier down the line. Once that was done, it was time to jump into ZBrush. Setting the orthographic image as a background, I start pushing and pulling some simple shapes to make them vaguely look like Pomni. I wasn't trying to be perfect at this stage, I was just trying to make her general silhouette so that the details would come easier later. So while I was editing this video, I noticed that the name of this specific clip was Pomni Blockout, Why Did This Take So Long? Looking back, it's because I spent a stupid amount of time on the feet. Like, half of this footage is just me choosing different shapes and trying to give them a shoe shape or a foot shape of some kind. I got the shape I wanted, eventually, and then I kind of just moved on to blocking out the rest of a vaguely implied Pomni. Once all the pieces were in place, I dynameshed all the shapes and merged together whatever I needed to, making them smooth and less like a low poly abstraction. The arm and hip balloons kind of ended up being placeholders, so to get the grooves I wanted in the appendage balloons, I needed to make an individual balloon and just carve the grooves in so it looked like a puffy arm poofy. Like a puffy arm and leg poofy. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Kitty! Kitty! Kitty, that's my backpack. You're sitting on my backpack, Miss Kitty. Kitty! You're ignoring me. So after I added the grooved poofies, I went in adding details to the body and the hat. The hat groove situation was definitely something, meaning I overthought it. It's one of those small details I spent way too much time on, and I definitely made them a couple different ways before I was eventually satisfied. I tried freehand carving the grooves, I tried masking the lines that later became the grooves and then extruding them. And the point of me telling you guys that is that I overthought it. I really, really overthought it. I know that I ended up following like the same mask and extrude method for the bodysuit grooves. Please don't overthink it, just carve it with a groove brush. Just take your groove brush and carve the groove. Don't overthink it. Pomni's hands were really simple, and I only made one set of hands this time versus the original 12 I made for the previous video. See, I'm way too ambitious for my own good sometimes, so I'm glad I kept it simple this time around. As for the joints, I have a confession to make. If you saw my last video of me making Doll Luigi, then you would have seen that I made the arms and leg joints twice. And I also talked as if the oval joints would work better than the previous ones. They didn't. Ovals don't work. Don't use ovals. The best shape that you can use is a round-based shape. Anyways, while thinking about the joints for this doll, I actually looked at the joints of a doll I already have. This doll right here was designed by the lovely Dollioso on Instagram, and was sculpted by the talented DigiDolls, who's also on Instagram. Her name is Isabel, or Carmela. I honestly don't remember which of the two this one is. Point is, when you take a closer look at this doll, you'll see that her joints maintain a bean shape while still having a rounded end, allowing her to bend smoothly. The entire doll is also quite large compared to the scale I usually work in. Keep this in mind because it's going to come up later. So the elbow joint is a bit different. You'll see that it's still rounded on both ends, while half of the joint sits comfortably inside a pocket, allowing the arms to remain straight. I promise I'm going to make a tutorial on how to make doll joints, and I'm going to give my Waluigi doll the justice his appendages deserve. But as you can see, referencing these joints was extremely helpful. Keeping this in mind, I approached the orthographic image and the creation of the actual joints with the intent of making these rounded little beans. I also added a little rounded end to the arm and leg poofies, intending for that to be the place where the arms and legs would twist. The head jointing process was its usual complicated process. Okay, I don't feel like giving us both a brain aneurysm trying to explain this, so just watch the sped up footage. The jointing for the hands is the typical magnet system I like since it makes it easy to swap hands, but you're gonna see how that ended up very soon. The feet, on the other hand, are the same bendy toes I like on doll feet, because I really just like dolls that can stand on their tippy toes. So when I make joints, I don't start hollowing out the holes and channels until I have all the joint shapes just the way I want them to look and function. The head is the obvious exception to this. But this is the point where I hollowed out everything that needed to be excavated and embalmed. Gotta make sure she looks presentable, right? Since the faceplate was already being held together with magnets, I made more magnet holes that would ideally keep the head on the head. You know, I feel like my phrasing is a pretty good giveaway for things to come. Once all the holes and channels are finished, I smooth down potentially sharp edges because, mark my words, they will always print out sharper than you'd think. So I do this to make sure I don't have to waste time sanding them later. One thing I saved for last was giving Pomni multiple expressions. I stuck to 3 this time because I definitely learned my lesson after printing how many I did for Waluigi. I don't remember how many that was, but it was definitely a lot, so I'm just keeping it simple down to 3 this time. Something I will do for everything I sculpt for the rest of my life is engraving left and right indicators on the respective sides of the parts. The simple answer for why I do this is because I'm kinda stupid. So it helps me keep track of what's what. Once I'm sure I have Pomni scaled to the right size in ZBrush, I bring her into my printing software. It's a simple process, really. Just add the model, add supports, export, and pray that your $200 resin printer cooperates. The hat was looking pretty chungus, but I told myself it'd be fine. And for the most part it was. Except for these little half-dinglings. Yeah, that happens sometimes. Oh yeah, this also happened. One of the faceplates had an extra hole when it was only supposed to have 2 for the magnet. I think this might have happened because of a silicone lubricant I use in the resin tray to stop the resin from sticking to the bottom of the tank. But considering how minuscule I thought this was, I was just going to fill it with some epoxy during the sanding process. Cutting off supports and sanding these pieces does get kinda redundant because it takes a painful amount of time. If you're wondering why I'm doing this on the floor and not on a table of some sort, it's because I started this project during the time I was preparing to move. So in between packing, I was sculpting, sanding, searching for apartments, and panicking as the deadline came closer and closer. So yeah, fun times, huh? While sanding, I realized the jester hat was way too large. And it was way too heavy. The copious amount of resin really makes it feel like an impractical paperweight, and as you can see, the poor faceplate is being consumed by the hat. Going back into ZBrush, I give the hat one good old shrunkly dunkly, and a lot of this recorded footage is me trying to figure out how to extrude the inner wall. I tried extruding the wall, but the border ended up looking like barbed wire covered in glass. So I opted to make a custom insert boolean for the hat and hope that it would work. The result was hollowed out, which is good because that's exactly what I was trying to do. I printed it out and baked it under the UV light oven. See those holes? Yeah, it happened again. Instead of using epoxy this time, I opted to use some clear UV resin that's like 6 years old. 6 years old? Oh my god, I'm old. Your changes. It did the job, but I'm not the best at applying this plastic syrup as smooth as I would hope. Similar to my emotions when I'm unmedicated, it's a pain in the arse to control. With that done, I gave the hat a good wet sanding and hoped that it would smooth out. Yeah, that clear UV resin is kinda hard to work with. With all the pieces in my regal presence, I decided to give Pomni a good test stringing to see how she was fitting together. And things were looking pretty Gucci. I also started putting magnets in her hands and head, and placing magnets in anything is a very annoying and unpleasant process. Seriously, they were coming out unsticky before the glue was completely dry, so I started marking them with paint markers, just praying that I didn't get the sides wrong. As you can see, the magnets were working great for the head. But the hands? Yeah, they were too heavy to be held by a magnet, so I knew I had to string the hands differently. Oh yeah, I put the magnet on the wrong side for one of the hands too. Fixing that in ZBrush was pretty easy. Just merge a ball to the hand, give it the right holes, and now you have a hand that can be hooked on with elastic. While those were printing, I went back to sanding the head and stuff. After the magnets were dry and I knew I put them in the right way, I covered them in some UV resin and baked them in pseudo sunlight. The clear resin doesn't really like being sanded, but since the head's gonna wear a hat, we don't have to worry about that too much. The new hands have printed, and just like the hat, they have those Swiss cheese holes. One hand was missing part of the wrist joint completely, so I covered it in UV resin and just told myself to carve it out with my Dremel. I also took the time to sand down some bumpies in the hat with my Dremel. You can't really see too much because the light exposure looks like I'm standing at the gates of heaven. But if you looked up close and saw how bumpy it was, you'd probably be like, "Kendall, this is a lot of effort for mid." And I'd be like, "Yeah." So yeah, now I need a new Dremel tip in this specific size that's only ever been found in a set. While still in my old living situation, I decided I probably didn't have the time to paint the doll in detail, so I instead just covered the doll in multiple layers of gesso so that the upcoming paint job would be opaque. White gesso on white resin does seem a bit redundant, but I may have also baked some of these pieces a bit too long, which is why some of them look a bit beige. Like the inner workings of my soul. Oh yeah, that green and brown on the magnet holes, that's paint marker I used to know which way the magnets were facing. It was a mess, but luckily I got these painted sometime before I moved, because soon it was time to pack and go. Of course, I needed some time to settle in before continuing, even though it's been about 2 months in this place and I still feel like I'm settling in. But once the furniture had some sense of organization, I took that as a sign that it was time to continue working on Miss Pomni. Taking a closer look with some fresh eyes now that I've been away from this doll for a bit, I'm starting to notice all the bumpy lumpies from the clear UV resin that I used to fill up some of the holes. One of the hat grooves just kinda no longer existed, and it has some nicks and bumps I couldn't pinpoint the source of. Remember that hand I mentioned that had holes and a missing piece of its wrist that needed to be filled with UV resin? This is him now. Do you feel old yet? Oh my god, that was bad. But yeah, this is mid, so while adding gesso, I also went back and Dremeled it until my fingies were numb. I did a big chunk of gessoing and white painting off camera, and it really helped it look more uniform. White print resin doesn't seem to come out all too consistent for me, but maybe that's because I tend to bake my pieces in the UV oven a little too long. After a smidgemeter more gessoing and painting, it was time for actual paint. Part of why I primed the doll in gesso in the same color is because I had a feeling colors like yellow would struggle to become opaque on some of these pieces, and thankfully the gesso did its job. Being the first color down, I wasn't too worried about clean edges since I assumed that I could cover crooked edges with paint. Put a pin in that. Moving on to red, I saw that the paint was definitely going to need more than one coat for these colors, and my hands were shakier than I thought. I already have some subtly shaking hands due to prolonged stress, so I kinda just assumed I would get past this level of shakiness eventually. Moving on to blue, and the shakies didn't change. I tried my best to keep clean edges and stuff, but the stars weren't aligned with me or something. Look at that. Craftsmanship. Anyways, when this happened, I applied layers of gesso on the overlapping paint splooshies while also adding light gesso in places that looked like the colors needed more help showing up before moving on to more layers. On one of those painting days, I didn't trust myself to paint clean lines, so I decided to try making clean lines with painter's tape. This didn't work. This was also the point where I realized the blue color I was using was too dark, so I mixed up a lighter blue with green blue and white. I guess it worked. Now that the parts were painted, it was time for me to feel disappointed and peel off those tape Twinkies. And every piece of tape I peeled off, revealing shoddy edges and thick, overlapping paint, did nothing but make me feel pain. So yeah, all this really did was give me extra work at the end of the day. To remedy this cringe, I grabbed some sandpaper and decided to sand down all these big bumps of paint on all the parts before painting more gesso on some of the naked bits. But then I got a little too trigger happy and started carving off paint on the hat, and you're gonna see how this turned out. The next day we come back to this. And if you're wondering why the hat looks British, it's because I went too deep with this blue scalpel thing that's made for cutting plastic. Nonetheless, I continued painting on the respective colors of all the pieces while accepting the fact that I'm gonna have to freehand clean lines. After multiple layers of paint, I finally got the paint to levels of opacity I was happy with, but the yellow trim on this doll definitely needed a pick-me-up. I reapplied a more golden shade of yellow because yellow doesn't really like being opaque. On the final yellow layer, I added some gold paint just for that little something something. After that, it was time to seal the deal with varnish. For those of you out there who are having trouble with your matte varnish coming out shiny, here's what you gotta do. You gotta shake it. And I don't mean just shake it like you usually would. Shake it until your arms hurt, and once you get to that point, you're only halfway done. Keep shaking it until it's more homogenized than a can of vegan whipped cream. So the reason why you have to shake it so much is because the matteness of the varnish is always gonna coagulate at the bottom. You gotta shake it and make sure that don't happen. Just shake it like it owes you money. I painted all the pieces hoping they'd survive my reckless and emotionally unstable lifestyle as an artist, deciding to move on to the other parts of the doll as they dry. This doll is going to need some hair, but to be honest, I'm way too cheap to buy doll hair. But who needs doll hair when you have a hank of human hair? I don't know how to start a video. So this is your hair?
It's nice, yes.
Can I use it for, can I use it for the Pomni doll?
You think you have enough hair.
What do you mean?
I think you have enough of your own hair.
I'm not cutting off my own hair.
You have a bag of hair.
Some of you might be wondering why I have a bag of human hair that's probably older than the latest popular indie game. And my answer to that is, don't ask questions you don't want to know the answer to because it's not polite. In order for this hair to actually be useful, I need to prepare it into wefts. And that starts by washing it. I'm gonna start washing the stinkies. What the heck happened here? Yeah, you should have known there was gonna be a substantial loss of some kind. Buy a Hot Topic hamster. Jesus. Why did I decide to do this? This is a terrible idea. I said if I was a hairstylist in my last video, I'd probably get sued. Grab the conditioner. Oh. I didn't think this would happen.
Oh, yeah.
Since the washing process was such a hassle, I made the wefts off camera and just decided to move on to preparing the rest of the body and the faces. After all the flat color painting, liquid sealant, and multiple layers of Mr. Super Clean, this is where we're at. It's opaque and clean, which is exactly the result I was hoping for. Something I also did off camera was cut some similar colored pieces of fabric for sueding. Hopefully this will make Pomni easier to pose while also making sure the paint job stays in place. It's an early gift for the Jorbo.
Pick you up really quick. Don't be making those noises. And he goes like,
See, doggy?
that kinda.
It's a bed for your feet. Come on, Jorbo. No.
He doesn't know what it's for. Yeah, there.
There you go, Jorbo. Oh, good boy. See, it's a comfy bed for your little feet.
Hold on, he's good.
For your little feet.
Come on. Come on, Jorbo.
Maybe we should put his blanket on top and then he'll sleep on it. Yay! Good boy.
Little Jorbo.
Good boy. Moving on to the faces, I started by applying some blush on the cheek center pupils, which I covered with acrylic paint later on, but we'll get to that later. Using a square brush, I dusted on some pastel for the presence of eyebrows, and this was the point that I realized I don't have a kneaded eraser, so I ended up using sticky tack to help shape the brows. You know, it worked for the time, but I really need to figure out what happened to my kneaded erasers. With my sharpest watercolor pencils, I go in and draw some black eyeliner around her eyes, some tiny lashes, and I fill in her brows. I also fill in her eyes with that pretty pinwheel pattern of blue and red. Then I do it all over again with the other two faceplates with some minute differences. This whole process took me longer than I thought because I always decide to paint faces when I have shaky low blood sugar hands. But a couple days into painting, I learned I was anemic during the period I was doing this all, and it definitely explained a lot. Anyways, the process isn't all too different. This time I just fill in the lower lid with black with the intent of painting some deep black on the lash line and on the lower lid after a few layers. I also use the black pencil to draw the outline of the mouth. As for the mental breakdown face, it's the same process, just with some random scribblies for the pupils. After that, I give them a good spray of Mr. Clean and continue painting them after the sun is set, so my only light source is one large lamp on my desk.
Oh jeez. I got my sweater caught on the air conditioner.
I take the same watercolor pencils and wet them so that I can apply the pigments with a brush. They're typically more opaque like this, and I also did the same for the pupil colors, working with the teeniest brush I have, hopefully making the lines all nice and sharp. which was painfully difficult this time around. Thanks, Mother Nature. I also drew in the cheek blush with watercolor pencil before wetting them, since at that point I decided I wanted the cheek blush to be nice and round. I also wet the white pencil with my brush in hopes of covering up my mistakes. I eventually made the smart decision to stop that night and continue to paint the other faces the next morning once I had some sunlight coming through my windows. You know, watching the colors become deeper and more saturated when they're painted on is actually really satisfying. It would definitely take a while if I drew on repeated layers of watercolor pencil. In this session, I also painted the eyelashes, and it was scary. I'd be holding my breath and shaking, and the slightest mistake would be anxiety-inducing. I didn't realize I was anemic at this point, by the way. While painting the scribblies, my low red blood cell count shakies actually helped me make the scribblies look more like scribbles. My shakies have been making me pretty anxious about my mistakes, so I busted out the white paint and started painting over what I perceived to be errors. But you can't really see much of an issue on camera. I beefed up some details and added some dark outlines on the pupils, and I also used the white acrylic paint to basically shape the eyebrows and eyelashes. One of the last things I did was try to add individual hairs to the eyebrows and stuff, and it was around this time I realized my hand shakies weren't as normal as I thought. Okay, I know that sounds weird, but I do really have naturally shaky hands. It's just usually a lot more subtle than this. These, on the other hand, were super obvious, and maybe the fact that I was feeling lightheaded and tired should have been a sign of something. But, you know, hindsight is 20/20. I busted out the white paint to basically keep sculpting the brows and eyelashes, and I also mixed a custom pink color for her pink cheeks. So cute. UwU. I seriously wrote UwU in my script.
I'm going to commit our...
Once I saw the unusual shakies, I went back to add some final details with colored pencil, paint, etc. Because I guess I'm that much of a perfectionist. Every time I look back at footage like this, I always find myself realizing it wasn't that bad at all, and I don't know why I was so picky during the painting process. After one final spray of Mr. Clean, it's time to work on the last important aspect of Pomni, that being her hair. Initially, the idea was to sew the wefts on a wig cap, and my track record for wigs is pretty bad, so that predictably didn't work. The original idea for the hat was for it to sit on her head while she had the wig on, but when the hat sat on the wig cap without any hair, it was really pushing it when it came to space. When it comes to making wigs, I really couldn't tell you why it seems to be such a struggle for me. I've watched multiple tutorials on doll wig making, multiple times over. I've tried sewn and glued wigs, so I really don't know what I'm doing wrong. Whatever it is, I need to get good fast because my next planned doll has hair that's an important part of their silhouette. Anyways, I eventually gave up on wigging and just started gluing hair into the hat. And it worked. To be clear, it worked the third time I did it. This footage is of the first time. The mix of colors wasn't what I wanted this time around, so I tore it out and tried again. But then I tore that out and tried a third time because the second try was too bulky inside the head. The third time was definitely my best attempt, but I actually styled the hair before gluing it into the hat. But since I have styling footage of the first time, you can watch it here for a bit. With all of that, it's time to string the doll together. Make sure the subject is off-center and you have a clear plastic container in front of your camera lens. Also, make sure that there's a chicken outside of your apartment. That's not a joke, by the way. There was a chicken outside of my apartment in the midst of me editing this video and taking doll photos. That's a chicken outside of the apartment. And she got a farm to get back to? Yeah, it's stuck in a tree now, and this is my fault.
Right here. Okay. Right here. Yes.
We caught the chicken.
Yeah.
It's a pretty chicken, honestly.
Chicken.
I got both your wings. Make sure you're safe. That car that just drove by probably is looking at us like, what the hell?
Oh yes.
So where'd you come from, Mr. Chicken? Or Miss Chicken? I think you were
Right there.
a hen. Yeah.
So yeah, that happened. Another thing I did that I didn't write in my script was I also made a doll stand out of some random stuff I had in my room. I didn't realize till the tail end of this project that I never sculpted a doll stand, so I ended up MacGyvering a doll stand out of some wire, some plastic tubing, and some wood dowels. And it surprisingly worked out pretty well. I also used some red yarn to hopefully make it look nice and cohesive with the character it was going to support. After taking some photos in my apartment, I wasn't too big of a fan of how uninteresting of a setting this apartment is. And while I was in the middle of a photo shoot, my cat started eating something that I was using as a photo prop.
Kitty, no! Oh no. Kitty? Kitty, no. Kitty. Oh well. Okay, I'm gonna put more potato on the plate, and you better not eat them this time, kitty. I'm watching you, and I'm watching myself through my phone. Okay, no, don't eat them. No eating.
Waluigi and Pomni needed to figure out something else for lunch, and so did I when it came to taking photos. I turned to my mom one day and said, "Hey, do you want to go to IKEA and take doll photos in their showroom?" And she said no because she had something to do that day, but you can bet your sweet tushy that that didn't stop me. safety first. That did not go at all as smoothly as I hoped. How was that? We good? So yeah, I drove like 19 miles from my home just to take doll photos in an IKEA, and it went surprisingly well. Seriously, when I started taking photos, I was super nervous that the staff was going to think I was being suspicious, so my hands were sweaty for like 2 hours before I got the hang of it. But not long after I started, this happened. Yeah, the hat fell off and broke within the first hour. So I was legitimately considering driving to a nearby store and buying some glue. Luckily for me, some nice IKEA employees gave me some clear tape, and with some strategic posing, it actually worked out pretty well. I was really into it for a couple of hours, but I did eventually go to the cafeteria for some emotional support cake, and Pomni didn't have any. What can I say? Being anxious in public is exhausting. Even with the broken hat issue, I'm really happy with how some of these pictures came out. Some of the showrooms were very fitting for Pomni. And of course, there's always Photoshop. So, that wasn't too bad, was it? Once I got home, I decided to get a bit more creative with possible photo scenes, and it looks like I did something right compared to the tea party my cat intruded on. While I can definitely see some things I would do differently now that she's done, I think she really came out great. But that's also partially why I won't be releasing the STL on my Gumroad store. That, and I would at least want to get the okay from Gooseworks before I did anything like that, since, you know, I don't own Pomni. Even with some time-constraining things like moving, I'm really starting to get the hang of making dolls in a more timely and consistent manner. If you'd like to see more from me, please check out my card linked in the description for my Instagram, Twitter, and many other social media sites. I don't usually ask for something like this, but if you guys could check out my Twitter and Instagram specifically, that would be very helpful. Despite the amount of followers I have on both platforms, I get a surprisingly low amount of engagement. And a lot of other artists I follow have a similar sentiment about both sites, so I would really appreciate it if you check those out. If you'd like to see more of my work or would like to hire a freelancer for your project, please check me out at cordelialibelle.com. That's KORDELIAHLIBELLE.com, and contact me through the listed email. I hope you're all doing well, and if nobody told you today, the world wouldn't be the same without you. Know that you're valued and you make my world a better place every day. Happy Valentine's Day, Happy Lunar New Year, and Shalom, everyone.
George, that's my shoe. I gotta go to work. George, get off my shoes. George.